All right, so our first storyteller tonight, representing Guts and Glory GNV, is Daniel Webster. So Daniel has been a preacher for 40 years. He's told a couple stories in his day, as you might have imagined. Yes, very cool. He served churches in a variety of settings: country churches, urban churches, suburban churches. And telling stories has helped bring differences and bridge differences and break down barriers in each of those settings. Daniel and his wife, Nell, who's wonderful, love to travel. Daniel is retired, and he and Nell live in Melrose, and with their rescue dog from Mississippi and 5 rescue cats. They're basically like the Humane Society out in Melrose. If you need anything, just go find Daniel. Daniel Webster's name is famous, but he is not. I kind of beg to differ, but here's Daniel Webster.
Wow. So a few years ago, actually probably over 20 years ago, I found a t-shirt. It was from a brand called No Fear. Some of you remember that brand, No Fear? Skateboarding brand, I think maybe. No Fear, it said right here, and then it had this saying on it. Very simply, it said, "Everyone who lives dies, but everyone who dies has not lived." Well, I thought that was a cool t-shirt. Everyone who lives dies. Everyone who dies has not really lived. It sort of became my motto. I found this shirt, believe it or not, at Disney World. That tells you how far back it actually was, because today you can't buy a t-shirt that doesn't have Mickey, Minnie, or one of the other characters on it. Everything is Disney, but back then, this cool t-shirt. It sort of became my mantra. I wanted to be one of those people who really lived before I died. It was important to me to, if I had something I feared but I was interested in, to try it. And so I've been skydiving, I've been scuba diving, I've been cliff diving, I've done a lot of things that scared the heck out of me. But the brand of the shirt was No Fear. So that was my motto, no fear. Everyone who lives dies, and everyone who dies has not really lived. That was it. A few years ago, I went to Jamaica on a work trip. My denomination had built a clinic way up in the mountains in Jamaica, and it had been blown away by a hurricane. We had sponsored the nurse, and she had had to come back to the States, and we decided we're going to rebuild that clinic, reestablish it, and bring the nurse back. And so I took a team. I lived in Illinois then. I took about 28 people to Jamaica to rebuild this clinic. We stayed up in the mountains about an hour north of Kingston in a little village called Lawrence Tavern. It had a tavern. For some reason, it wasn't Lawrence's Tavern, but it was a tavern. It had a little shop, it was a combination ice cream and barber shop. Think about that just for a moment. And it had a little sheriff's office. That was pretty much the whole town. So people would come into that town, get off the bus from work at the end of the day, and they would head up the mountain into the places where they lived, where they shared homes with their families. And we were staying at a boarding school just north of town. I mean, 300, 400 yards, just barely north of town. We would eat there and sleep there. We ate some very interesting things there. Snail soup, and I don't mean escargot. I mean snail soup. Grape nuts ice cream. Think about that. cereal ice cream. So it was a neat place, but the thing that was way cool about it was there were dorms. Upstairs on one side, there were women's dorms. When I say dorms, what I mean is about 20 bunk beds. And on the other side, 20 bunk beds for men. So we were spread out apart from each other. We slept there, but outside the doors to those rooms was a veranda. And we would sit up there at the end of a long, hard working day, schlepping cinder block and mixing concrete and putting together the foundation and the walls for this clinic. At night, we would sit on that veranda and we would tell stories and we would give each other back rubs, and we were really getting to know each other. It was really becoming quite intimate among us as we shared our stories, our hopes, and our dreams. About the third night that we were sitting on the veranda talking, all of a sudden, coming down the mountain, we heard the sound of music. And we listened. It had a syncopated beat, and we were, okay, this is Jamaica. And one of the women said, I think that's a hymn. We all listened real closely to the music, and sure enough, we recognized it as an old hymn, but done a little bit Jamaican style. And we were kind of enjoying that, and then there was another song, a Christian song, and then another hymn, and it was all done with a syncopated beat, very Jamaican, and we thought, well, that's interesting, wonder what's going on. The next day we got up, we worked hard, we came back, took showers on the nights that there was water. That night we're sitting there, and coming down the mountain just a little bit louder than the night before was more music. But this time it was definitely reggae, ska, and dance hall music. And we were sitting, listening out there, giving each other back rubs and telling stories and listening to good Jamaican music. The third night, a little bit louder than the night before, we heard the Christian music again. Hymns, Christian songs, gospel, kind of rolling down. Well, that's 3 nights. One night Christian, one night secular, one night Christian, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. So the next morning, we got up, and I asked our bus driver. He seemed to know everything about everything, and I said, what is going on that we're hearing different kinds of music a little bit louder each night? And he laughed. He said, oh, well, there's a revival going on up in the mountains. And the folks at the revival set up and put speakers up, big speakers, and they aimed them at the tavern across the street. So what you heard the first night was the revival music aimed at the tavern. That sort of pissed off the folks at the tavern. And so they went out and rented more speakers than they had at the revival. And so the next night, we were hearing the reggae, the ska, and the dance hall music. Third night, the revival folks got more speakers. So we assumed that night that we would be hearing the reggae, the dance hall, and the ska music all over again, coming down even louder. But as soon as he told us what was going on, I looked at my buddy and I said, oh, I'm going. And my buddy, Dwight, who was my denominational executive, he was pastor to me as a pastor, he said, oh, me too. And so that night, as soon as we got through with dinner, we decided to head up the mountain, figured we'd go up as far as we could. The music would start, and we would find our way back to this music war between the tavern and the revival. And we headed up, and the music started, and what we realized was it was bouncing off the hills, and we couldn't figure out which way to go. Sometimes we thought it was that way, and sometimes we thought it was that way. And I looked over and I saw a car I said, Dwight, I need to go and ask those people how to get to this revival. And so I headed toward the car, and Dwight grabbed me and he said, no, not you. You need to let me go. I said, why? He said, because you're white. Dwight wasn't. So we go over to the car, knock on the window. Dwight's there. I'm a little bit behind him. And they roll down the window. And there was this vague, no, it wasn't vague. A smell like, a concert from my youth. I mean, 6 dudes in the car smoking ganja, and it is just billowing out. Dwight and I are getting a secondary high. And we're asking, how do you get to this revival? Actually, I think we politically corrected ourselves. How do we get to the music? We weren't sure they wanted anything to do with a revival. And so they pointed and told us, yeah, man, you go this way, you do that, you do this, you do that. And so we started heading off, and a few minutes later, we weren't sure we were going in the right direction. And all of a sudden, I look back, and here comes a ganja car. Oh, shit. That was Dwight. I would never say anything. These guys come rolling up to us, man, you missed a turn where you didn't understand what we said. Follow us. Now, we don't know where they're leading us for sure, but we decided in a leap of faith, because we're pastors, that we will follow them. And so they lead the way about 3 miles an hour. Because that's about as fast as they could go. And they led us up, and they pointed, and then they pulled up behind the tavern, and oh, the dance hall music was loud. It was loud. We got there, and what we realized was there was a semi-truck trailer with the sides rolled up on either side, literally filled with speakers aimed at the revival across the street. We were coming in from behind as soon as we got in front of it, and oh, it was loud. I mean, we could hear it, we could feel it, we could taste it. I don't know if that had anything to do with the ganja car. But once we got past the semi-trailer with all the speakers, we heard the Christian music. They had rented 2 semi-trailers aimed at the tavern. It was, y'all, I've been to see the Rolling Stones a few times. They're pikers. When it comes to loud, this was unbelievable. We get over there. There's probably seats for 250 people. There's probably 700 people standing. This music is loud. And people are just flat in the spirit. They are getting it. They are getting it. They are hands raised, the whole 9 yards. And my buddy Dwight is over there just flat, getting it, getting it, getting it. And I'm getting it too, y'all. They make an announcement that the preacher for that night, for the healing service that night, was sick. I thought that was as funny as you all apparently did. And so they were just going to have a short sermon, and they were going to do a lot more music because they were going to knock the folks out across the street at the tavern. So the music starts back up after a very short little sermon, and we are back to getting it. Dwight is boogieing, and I am doing my little thing. And I look down, and there is a little boy. He's just looking up at me. Finally, the music gets quiet enough, and he waves me down. And he says, "Are you a white man?" I said, "Yes, I'm a white man." He nodded his head. All of a sudden, an elderly woman came scooting out of the crowd, clearly his grandmother, and she puts her hands on him and she's starting to steer him away. And she looks at me and she said, "He's never seen a white man before except in a magazine. He's fascinated by you." And I said, "Ma'am, it is perfectly okay for him to stand here beside me. I don't mind at all." And so we're back at it. The music is going. I'm into it. And I feel this little boy leaning against my leg. And then he reaches his arm and he's hugging my leg. And so now I'm just tapping with my other foot. And then the music gets quieter again. And he looks up at me and waves me down, and then he says, "Are you alive or dead?" I really wished I'd had my shirt. Everyone who lives dies. Everyone who dies has not really lived. But I didn't. You know, professional courtesy and curiosity, I've been to quite a few revivals. Even preached a few myself. There's always a point when the question comes. It's a different question, different times, different people, different preachers, but the question comes, sometimes it's, "Are you saved?" And my response usually is, "For what?" Or sometimes it's, "If you died tonight, where would your eternal soul reside tomorrow?" Man, that does nothing for me. But that kid, "Are you alive or dead?" That might be the best revival I ever went to. Certainly the best question. So somewhere along the way, I wore out the shirt. It made it onto the rag heap and then disappeared, but it's always stuck in my head. But these days I have another motto or slogan that sticks in my head. It's an African proverb. When the spirit of death comes, may it find you alive.